Hi everyone, and welcome to module number 9. We're moving past pitch and moving into the world of rhythm notation. In this video, we're going to define the term rhythm, going to be able to recognize all of the duration symbols for notes, rests, and measures. Okay, and we're going to define the term meter, and we'll be able to describe the difference between duple, triple, and quadruple meter. Okay, so the basics of rhythm and rhythm notation. So rhythm is just a general term we use to refer to all the things that have to do with the amount of time in music. So remember our definition of music, it was an organization of sound over a period of time, right? And one thing that music theory actually is pretty bad at is describing rhythm and talking about rhythm. So the word rhythm kind of gets used interchangeably to mean a lot of different things. So we kind of define it as just a general term that refers to all the things that have to do with time in music. Okay, this could be things like how long a sound lasts for, or how much time there are between sounds. So how long do the silences last for? How rapidly do these sounds occur? Right? Do they happen fast? They happen slow? Also, how are these sounds organized over a period of time? Are there patterns to these sounds? These are all things that fall under the umbrella of rhythm. And there are a lot of other things too, which we'll talk about later. So let's deal with that first one, which is how long sounds last, and also the amount of time between sounds. So we have a system of notation that allows us to notate, to show, or to record how long a sound lasts. But one drawback is it's not exact. In fact, it's all relative to the other symbols used to represent duration, right? So if you just see this symbol here in notation, which is called a whole note, you don't actually know how long that lasts, right? Without a lot of other information. But that whole note is the basis for all the other rhythm symbols that kind of happen underneath of this. So if you have one thing that defines how long a whole note is, then you can define what the different proportions of that whole note are, right? So if you're given the length for a whole note, you can divide that whole note into two parts, right? Divide it into half, and we call those half notes, and now you know how long half notes are relative to that whole note, okay? Likewise, you can divide the half note into two parts, and it becomes quarter notes. So now you know how long things are relative to the half note, which is relative to the whole note. So you have this whole system based on knowing one factor, which is the length of one note, and then you can determine the lengths of all the other notes based on that one note. But they're all relative, they're all proportional to that one note, okay? And this system continues, right? You can divide a quarter note into two eighth notes, and you can divide an eighth note into two 16th notes, right? And so what I mean by dividing it is just saying that I have a plus there, so I'm just saying like two 16th notes are the same length as an eighth note, and two eighth notes are the same length, the same duration as a quarter note, and two quarter notes are the same duration as a half note, and two half notes are the same duration as a whole note, right? But eventually you have to define the length of at least one of those, but once you do, you know the length of all the other notes in the system, okay? And the system also extends beyond this, so you can have a 16th note divide into 32nd notes, you can have a 32nd note divide into 64 notes, and if you ever end up in the dark reaches of 128th notes, you can have those too, because that would be 64 notes divided in half as well. And then you can go the other way too. It's pretty rare to see it, but you can have something called a breve, which is actually the length of two whole notes, okay? But yeah, that doesn't occur too often. Another thing to remember is that the notes that have flags over them, such as the eighth notes and the 16th notes, it's common to do what's called beaming them together. And this is actually weirdly something the book doesn't mention, but you have to know that that symbol over to the right there with a beam, that's the same thing as writing two eighth notes. They're just connected together with a beam. And then right here, now that I've added the double beam, right, that's the same as 4 16th notes, right? So I've added two 16th notes to the pattern there, right? But those 4 notes there, all under a double beam, is the same thing as writing 4 16th notes in a row. And we'll learn later why the beaming is important. But for now, it's enough to know that they will look slightly different, but they just mean 8th notes and 16th notes. And you can tell by the number of beams, right? The number of beams is equal to the number of flags on the other note, the disconnected note. Okay, so that's how we determine, or we notate durations relative to each other. We also have a system to notate the silences, the length of time between different notes that we play. We call these rests. And so that's the whole rest there, and that's the half rest there. And one thing that I'll always remember about these is that you don't actually have to draw the line that's on that little rectangle. And I remember I was in a class once and I was asked to write that on the board, and I tried to write the little line, and my teacher was kind of a jerk about it and said, "Don't draw the line." And I was like, "Oh, of course not." Right? So just remember that you don't actually need to add that line. That line is just telling you if it goes below a line on the staff or above a line on the staff. Okay? So the whole rest actually is below a line on the staff, and the half rest is the same symbol, just above a line on the staff. And then the quarter note rest is that one. Looks pretty like a little squiggly thing. And then these oddballs here, they're called eighth rest, right? It has a little flag just like the eighth symbol. And then if you double that flag, it's a 16th rest, right? Now those can't be beamed together, but they do have the same kind of flags as the individual 16ths and 8ths, right? And of course, this system extends to, there's like a double whole note rest or a brev rest, and there's also 32nd note rest and 64th note rest, all the way down to infinity. Okay, so notes and rests, that's how we notate sounds, that how long sounds last and how long silences last. Okay, you can also sometimes those aren't adequate to represent all the durations that we're going to need, and so you can also extend the duration of notes by using a tie. Okay, so here I have a half note, and if I want to make that longer than what a half note normally is, right, I would just use a tie to connect it to a different note. So now you know to hold this note for as long as a half note lasts, plus as long as a quarter note lasts. Okay, you actually cannot tie rests together. I've never really seen that before. But notes and rests can also be extended by the use of what's called the augmentation dot, or the book just calls it the dot. And the dot adds half the value of the note to the total duration of that note. So that half note, right, by itself, of course, is equal to the length of a half note. But when you add a dot, you add half of the value of that half note. And half the value of a half note is a quarter note. So this dotted half note is the same length as a dotted half note tied to a quarter note. Okay? So yeah, it's just a way of, it's sort of like a tie, right? But it's limited to the halves of whatever note it's connected to. Okay? And then you can dot your eighth notes or your rests as well. So these two eighth note rests are equal to each other right now. But when you add a dot to the eighth rest, it's the same length as an eighth plus half of that eighth, which is a 16th. So the total length of that dotted eighth note rest is an eighth note and a 16th note rest. Okay. So beat and tempo, they address one of those other issues we talked about, which is how rapidly different sounds occur. So beat is just the basic pulse of a piece of music. And so when you listen to a piece of music, the thing that you're nodding your head to, you're tapping your foot to, or you're moving to, right, is the pulse of the piece of music. That's the beat. And in music notation, we pick one of those duration symbols and we use that to represent the beat. So you might have a piece of music that uses the quarter note as the beat. And then you'll know that the part that you need to feel, right, that you're moving to, that is the basic pulse, is represented by a quarter note. We'll talk way more about that later. The tempo is how fast or slow those beats occur, right? So some pieces of music have a fast beat, right? Other pieces of music have a slow beat. And we refer to that as the tempo, so how fast or slow those beats occur, okay? And in a piece of music, in a score or something, the tempo is often indicated by words such as like fast, slow. Italian words like allegro are common too, moderato, things like that. And it's also common to see a metronome marking that tells you how many beats there should be per minute, right? So when somebody says, oh, this is 120 beats per minute, they're telling you how fast the tempo is, right? How fast those beats occur. Okay, and that's really the only way we can define, you know, how long those duration symbols last, right? So we're defining the beat by the tempo, right? And the beat is represented by one of those duration symbols, but they all depend on each other. You can't know like how many seconds a half note's going to last unless you have all the other information that's provided on the score. Okay, so meter addresses the last little thing we said about rhythm, which is it can also refer to the organization of sounds over a period of time. Okay, so like what's the structure of these beats? And meter is the repeating pattern of beats in a piece of music. So the meter is the structure of beats, the way that the beats feel like they repeat over a period of time. Okay, and these patterns occur because some beats are accented or they're stronger than other beats, and are really, you know, the easiest thing to hear is what's called a waltz, right? Everybody kind of knows what a waltz is. And if you think about a waltz, right, it goes strong, weak, weak, strong, weak, weak, right? So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, right? So you can see that there's a strong beat followed by 2 weak beats. So that creates a pattern that we call a meter. And since that strong, weak, weak pattern has 3 beats in it, we call that a triple meter. Okay. There's another common one is the quadruple meter, and that has 4 beats in it. So the first beat is a strong beat, the second beat is a weak beat, the third beat is kind of a halfway in between, we call it a medium beat, and then another weak beat, right? So it's like ta, 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 right? So it has a pattern of 4 beats that repeats. And then of course you have the shortest one, which is duple meter, which is just a pattern of strong, weak, right? Ta, 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 ta. Okay. Now these can be, well, triple meter is pretty easy to hear, but quadruple and duple, since, you know, quadruple is really just 2 duple meters, right? Because 4 is, when you divide 4 in half, you get 2, right? So it's easy to kind of confuse those two, and you can actually probably debate whether or not a song is in quadruple or duple meter, right? But one thing you want to listen to is something like a bass line. So a lot of duple meter songs will have a bass line that kind of alternates back and forth to make it clear that there are 2 beats per measure, right? Whereas like a quadruple meter song might have a bass line that has 4 different notes, right? 4 different, a bass pattern that makes it sound like there are groups of 4, right? So you kind of have to be careful, but I think when you're first starting out, it's okay to confuse the two. So like in the homework, I think it asks you to like identify the meter of some of the songs that I've provided links to. And if you confuse duple and quadruple, that's okay, because a lot of time there's a little bit of a debate as to whether something's in quadruple or duple meter. Okay. In music notation, the patterns of beats are grouped into measures. So let's take, for example, a duple meter and see how we would notate that. So a duple meter has a pattern of strong, weak, right? And so let's say that our beat, which can be represented by any duration symbol, let's use the half note to represent the beat. And so if we were given a pattern of 4 beats, right? Ta, 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 ta. We could use measure lines to show that the first note in that group, in that measure, is the strong beat, and the second beat in the measure is the weak beat. So whatever is closest to the beginning of the measure gets the stronger beat, right? So whatever is closest to the bar line gets the strongest beat. So this duple meter, just by looking at it, you know, you would perform it like ta, 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 right? So that's kind of a theory meets practice thing too. Like if you You don't ever want to perform this. You don't want to play this like ta 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 ta, because that has no accent to it, right? It doesn't really have any life when everything is the same volume, right? So these meters aren't just theoretical, they also factor into how you perform these. All right, so let's look at another one, a triple meter, which has a strong beat and two weak beats, ta 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 ta, and we'll use the quarter note to represent the beat this time. So here are 6 quarter notes, and to make it look like triple meter, we use bar lines to divide those into 2 groups of 3. And you can tell by looking at it that the strongest beat is the one closest to the measure, right? Closest to the beginning of the measure. So when you perform something that looks like this, you'd perform it ta, 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 right? Which makes it sound like triple meter, okay? And then quadruple meter, we'll use the 8th note to represent this. So here are 8 eighth notes. And to make it look like quadruple meter, we'll add bar lines every 4 eighth notes. And so you can see that the first 8th note in the group, right? First 8th note in the measure gets the emphasis. And then you would know from performance practice that the 2nd and 4th ones are a little bit weaker, and that the 3rd one is just slightly stronger, right? So ta, 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 right? Which is a quadruple meter. Okay, so that's our quick little intro to rhythm. There's a lot more to this, which we'll be getting to later. But these are the few things you need to know to be able to do the assignment for tonight. If you have any questions, you can ask in the Zoom session or over email or in the discussion forum. Love to answer questions, so please just let me know. Yeah, and otherwise, thanks for watching, and have a great day.